Welcome back to the channel. Vacancy home tax in Ontario. Has Ontario already implemented such a thing? Or should I say, 3 cities that already signed off on this particular decision? How will this impact you? Stay tuned and let's talk about it. If you're wondering where I am, I'm currently at Macmillan Park, which is near Port Credit, south of Lakeshore. Nearest intersection is Katra. Has a beautiful promenade right here behind me. Sits on Lake Ontario. People are walking here, taking their bikes, walking their dogs. Very friendly atmosphere. You can walk for miles in each direction, and it is a beautiful area. But let's go back into the vacancy tax in Ontario. So 3 cities that already signed off on this decision. So one of them is Toronto. So Toronto already signed off this particular decision. Ottawa was the second, and the third one is Hamilton, Ontario. So these 3 cities will impact you with vacancy home taxes. So how do they work? So if you own a particular property and it is your primary residence, matrimonial home, there's no vacancy tax since this is where you live and all of that other stuff. But if you have a secondary property, now this particular tax will affect you in these 3 cities of Toronto, Ottawa, and Hamilton. So how so? So basically they're trying to make space for these properties to come back to the market and have more of these rental units hit the market because we have a housing shortage, so they say. So how does it actually work? So if you have a property that is not your primary residence in one of these 3 cities, Toronto, Ottawa, and Hamilton, and it is your second property, and you have not rented it out, then you will be hit with the vacancy tax. So then you're asking, how much is that? So that is a 1% of the value of that particular property. So for example, let's say that property is valued at $1 million in Hamilton. So 1% is $10,000 will be added on the tax each year. But then you say, okay, so there are certain rules and guidelines. So how could you actually avoid that? And there's actually ways you could avoid that. So if you live in that particular property for more than 6 months out of the year, then exempt. You don't pay that particular tax. Or if you rent that particular property for more than 6 months, then it's not a problem. You have to register, you have a tenant more than 6 months, easy. So now, a lot of these properties have been inherited over a long period of time. Grandma, grandpa, parents, and all of that stuff. And it could be, some of these properties that are now in well-developed and built areas. But, 50 or 70 or 90 years ago when family members bought these properties, they were maybe cottages and maybe they kept these in family forever. Now, you might not want to share that particular property with anyone else, or you're using that particular property, 2-3 months out of the year, and you say, okay, look, it is still my property, has been in the family for, decades, years, it's inheritance. Now, I don't want to rent it. I mean, it's like, I don't feel comfortable renting it. Well, no problem. Vacancy tax, boom, 1%. And some of those values, imagine in Toronto, could be over $2 million. So that could be easily a $20,000 added onto your taxes annually, right? But then you can say, okay, look, I'll jump through the hoops and I'll, rent, the property, couple of months out of the year, and then I'll just go in myself and enjoy that particular property whenever I want. Let's say holiday season, summer season, winter season, skiing season, whatever the case is, but you want to enjoy it as you did before. Now, how is this going to work? Because you think about it for a second. If you sign a lease with a tenant, right? Most of the tenants would like to stay longer term, or at least a minimum of 1 year, let's say, okay? But then you say, okay, look, maybe you could be lucky and you could find these off tenants, right? So it is very difficult to maneuver that type of thing, because if they stay for 6 months, what if they don't want to leave right away? And then how you gonna, there's like, it's becoming complicated. But then you can say, okay, so I can Airbnb it, because that's another option. Like our Toronto downtown is full of these speculators, investors that had that particular piece of puzzle in mind. I will rent long term, and that was going well because they were seeing profits years ago, and then that started to shrink slowly. Then they said, hey, you know what, there's a new method, we can Airbnb it, right? So Airbnb is a short-term lease, over a weekend, a week, and etc. So that was very lucrative, and it kept making that particular investment make sense for a longer period of time. But then, as you know, in most of these properties or neighborhoods and stuff like that, Airbnbs are not allowed. You're not allowed to Airbnb even though you own it, because there are different policies in place and whatnot. So Airbnb is out of the question. You cannot short-term lease it without huge risks. So what if you lease it and someone says, okay, so I'll take it for 6 months, and then they don't want to leave. Like, they don't want to leave. So there you go. They screwed with your plans all along. And you should be lucky if they're even paying rent at that particular time, because everything is clogged when it comes to the landlord tenancy boards and all of that stuff. Like, it is insane. It is very difficult, and it is in favor of tenants all along. So it is extremely difficult. Now, getting back to the topic, so what could you do? I mean, you could live there for 6 months at a time, if that makes any sense. You can rent it for 6 months at a time. You could, let's say you tell your tenant, okay, after 6 months I will move in. Let's say that because you're allowed to do that, because it's still your property, you're allowed to do that. But then think about that for a second. Like, let's say you manage to get that property after 2-3 months plus the 6 months that they were occupying it. You have to be there for over a year. So it's not like you can say, I want to move back in, and then because that particular tenant can sue you. Like, you cannot just give your property and kick people out as you please and as you wish, unfortunately. And in a way, it is good for tenants, because they also have to organize their life. I mean, we're talking about people's lives at this point. Okay, so now, is it all that bad? Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, because foreign investors are not here. Investors who are sitting on current funds, money, and ways that they could actually invest in the market, you're shaving all of the profits everywhere, that it doesn't even make any sense for someone to actually invest money, because it's called an investment. I want to invest and I need something in return, right? It's very simple math. So, 2-3 decades, we saw it in Toronto. People were buying, and doesn't matter like at what price they were buying it at, because it was more freedom. They could see positive cash flow. Even at that time, I remember, condos were selling $500, $600 a foot. And at that time, it was huge. It was insane. Like, you could not even imagine that someone would actually be able to get their money back. Never mind. But it made sense. That made sense, because they were still making X amount of money. They were above water, positive cash flow, and they had to invest the money, which is not a problem. So now we're in this vacuum from both sides, in my opinion, because the investors are sitting on funds and cash, nobody wants to invest because it just doesn't make any sense. Nobody wants to be underwater. Um, then we have a landlord tenancy board, which is extremely scary, right? Then we have the vacancy tax, which if you even wanted to invest and just shut the doors and say, okay, it's mine, I'll just use it for my own pleasure. So it's basically a luxury tax, right? Of even though it's 1%, like, real estate is extremely expensive. So on $1 million, 10,000, 2 million, 20,000 and whatnot, right? So on all these angles, like they're just shut and it doesn't make any sense. So now I'm asking you, is it fair that if someone inherited some of these properties, all along, and they wanted to keep these properties in their family for maybe centuries, for decades, or whatever their plan is, but they just want to keep it, right? Like now they're being taxed, like on that particular property, they're being taxed heavily, and they're being literally pushed either to sell it or to do something with it, rent it or give it away or whatever the solution is. So now the pool of money is shrinking. So these developers, how they work on a large scale or a small scale, it is very simple. They need funds. They jump through loops, through the city, acquiring land, making all these connections and the network and organizing everything in order to develop a property, a complex, a tower, subdivision, whatever it is. But then you have the investors that are investing in that, asking for a return, and there's a couple of types of returns, a bulk return, or over a certain period of speculative time, but it's speculation. Like I know that I will not gain positive cash flow today, but I will gain in other ways, right? Like different zoning, like I might be able to change the zoning in a particular area, or the property will go up and I'll take my gains in that particular vision or whatever the case is. So now everybody is gone. These developers are here to push. Everybody is subsidizing them to make more properties because there's a housing shortage, and we're not moving because the investor is cut. And on the other side, if you own it, you're being taxed. It's becoming a luxury. Like it's becoming a luxury owning. But now if you have even more than that, it's becoming a huge tax implication, unfortunately. So please comment below. Like I want to hear what you want to say. It is very important to talk about these things because eventually we will find a solution to all of our problems. So thank you all for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and see you all next time.